Hello and welcome to Thursday's edition of the Daily Report. It's March 10th here in Korea, where the 20th presidential election has come to a close, with the opposition party regaining the reins of the country's top office. We have more on the incoming administration's potential pandemic response later on the program. Here first are the COVID-19 tallies with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start with the latest here in Korea.
Sunny, for the second straight day, Korea posted more than 300,000 new COVID-19 infections. That's 327,549 as of 12 a.m. to be exact this Thursday. And it is, however, a slight drop in both domestic transmissions and imported cases from the day before. As the day before, we did have an all-time high at above 342,000. Now, if we compare this Thursday's figure to the week before, on Thursday, it is an on-week surge by almost 130,000 cases. Now, meanwhile, while there were record highs across the nation the day before, there are also some places that's another increase compared to the day before. While Gyeonggi-do province and Seoul both dropped, we have Incheon here with an all-time high of close to 22,000 infections this Thursday. And also another record high has been posted in Jeollabuk-do province for the first time here at above 10,000. Also, Jeju-do Island here close to 5,000 infections in a span of 24 hours. And now let's move on to the number of deaths here in the country related to the COVID-19 virus, standing at 9,646, and 206 people have lost their lives in the past day. This is the second highest figure for a single day death toll here in Korea. And moving over to the number of patients that remain in severe or critical condition, this number has gone up another time here to 1,113 as of 12 a.m. Moving over to our vaccination figures, not too many vaccinations were administered on election day yesterday, a little over 1,000 and 1,200 respectively when it comes to the first and second dose. And also not too many booster shots were administered either, with a little over 7,800 on Wednesday. Now let's move over to the global figures. Around 1.8 million new cases in the past day and more than 7,700 fatalities. On to some specific countries. Germany has posted a little over 190,000 new infections in the past day. And we have more and more Asian countries moving up on this table. We've got Vietnam surpassing Ukraine, with now hitting 5 million cases in total. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll be back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, up next, Choi Min-jung is here with more on the COVID-19 situation here in the country and elsewhere across the world. Min-jung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so I hear the special voting time slot for COVID-19 patients went quite well Wednesday evening, that would be.
That's right, Sunny. Voting for COVID-19 patients appeared to be much smooth, unlike the confusion that has been going on during early voting last weekend. People with COVID-19 cast their ballots starting at 6 p.m. after regular voting hours to minimize any risk of transmission. In a few regions, though, some people did not receive a test notification with information on the voting time, which led to some confusion. Health experts say that although some infections may occur from polling stations, an explosive surge as a direct result of the election isn't very likely. Others have also raised concerns over a possible spread of the virus at schools, where a number of polling stations were located. But health authorities have assured that there is a low risk of infection, as these venues were all thoroughly disinfected and ventilated after the voting ended. The National Election Commission estimated that around 618,000 voters had voted after 6 p.m. And this being said, there were a total of 1.2 million people recovering from COVID-19 at home on Election Day. And as of Thursday, that figure is now close to 1.3 million.
Right, I see. Min-jung, meanwhile, the head of the global health body has called for continued caution, of course, against COVID-19. Tell us about that.
Right. The WHO Director General said during a briefing on Wednesday that the pandemic is far from over, even while global cases and deaths are declining and many countries are lifting restrictions. According to the agency's latest report, global COVID-19 cases fell around 5% in the previous week, with deaths also dropping by 8% over the past 2 weeks. However, the WHO chief cautioned that infections and deaths are surging in the Asia-Pacific region. The report showed that the Western Pacific saw a 46% increase in COVID-19 cases last week. The head of the global health body also said he was concerned that many countries have drastically reduced testing, saying this makes it difficult for experts to track the spread of the virus.
Right, and before I come back to you, Minjung, I'm going to include Soa in our talk right now. So I understand the WHO has also separately voiced concerns about the violence over in Ukraine and its potential impact on the pandemic there. Tell us about that.
Right, Sunny. The WHO addressed a number of health issues in Ukraine, Russian attacks on medical facilities as well as healthcare workers. And yes, all of that is also affecting the COVID-19 situation there. So the health body says the coronavirus and other infectious diseases are more likely to amplify and spread under such poor conditions. Mike Ryan, a senior WHO official, stressed that conflict and infectious diseases are closely intertwined and that the health situation in Ukraine won't improve unless there is a ceasefire. With that, he in particular noted health risks among the growing number of Ukrainian refugees.
You put that many people in desperation on the move, women and children packed together, people in basements, people stressed, people not eating, not sleeping. These are the conditions in which immune systems are weak, people's defenses are low, and infectious diseases can rip through populations like this.
Right, unfortunately, of course. Minjung, now, as you mentioned earlier, the WHO appears particularly concerned about the outbreak here in the Asia-Pacific region, right?
Right. China is witnessing its highest ever number of daily infections in 2 years, with cases remaining above 500 for 3 straight days. The country had been seeing under 100 cases, but figures began to increase around early March with the rampant spread of Omicron. Jilin province in northeast China was one of the regions hardest hit by Omicron, with a record of around 160 symptomatic cases newly reported on Wednesday. The city of Jilin has decided to close businesses for a week, with exceptions for those providing essential services. People are also not allowed to leave their homes unless it's absolutely necessary until Sunday. And meanwhile, the Omicron outbreak is also spiraling out of control over in Hong Kong. They are currently witnessing a spike in the number of fatalities, with over 2,600 deaths reported since the 5th wave swept across the country at the end of December. The majority of the victims have been the elderly, and around 90% were not vaccinated. And with this, the government has decided to postpone its mass testing plan, explaining that reducing the number of deaths is currently its #1 priority. And daily cases in Japan are also on the uptrend, with cases hovering around 60,000. And they have been reporting more than 200 daily deaths for 2 days in a row, although it's a drop from the country's peak of some 320 deaths around 2 weeks ago.
I see. All right, Minjung, as always, thank you very much for the coverage. I'll see you on Friday.
Thank you.
Right, and staying with our coverage of the Omicron situation beyond Korea, so I turn back to you. I understand other countries in the Western Pacific region are struggling, continue to struggle, that is, amid the presence of Omicron.
Well, Sunny, Australia and New Zealand, former success stories in fighting the COVID-19 outbreak, continue to experience surging figures and are also adopting new measures that appear to be tailored to the Omicron wave. Now, New Zealand on Thursday reported more than 21,000 new infections, remaining at that level for the past 3 days. The Omicron subvariant BA2 accounted for around 2/3 of cases last week. Officials say that the Delta variant also is still present in the community. Meanwhile, health authorities starting Thursday were said to be using a new method of reporting COVID-19 deaths, similar to the UK and a number of other countries. They will count those who have died within 28 days of testing positive. And from Friday midnight, the isolation period for COVID-19 patients and close contacts will be reduced from 10 to 7 days. With close to 16,300 new infections on Thursday, Australia is also experiencing an upward trend, especially in Western Australia, where half as many COVID-19 cases were tallied in the past week as during the entire pandemic. Health experts say, however, that the number does not translate into a rise in severe cases, attributing this to high vaccination rates.
Meanwhile, so in places where the peak has passed, fewer people will be wearing face masks, I hear.
Yes, so we're talking about Canada here, for instance. COVID-19 prevention curbs, including mandatory wearing of face masks, are gradually being lifted there. Canada's largest province, Ontario, announced on Wednesday mask requirements will end in most indoor spaces later this month on the 21st, and in healthcare facilities and public transportation on April 27th. Strict vaccine rules at hospitals, colleges, and universities are due to be scrapped next week. By the end of April, all remaining COVID-19 public health measures may be lifted. Authorities say the shift was needed for a more balanced response to the pandemic. Alberta and Quebec have also announced easings, with Quebec getting rid of its vaccine verification system in public places. U.S. citizens are also taking off their masks nationwide as Hawaii became the 50th and final state to lift an indoor masking rule that is, earlier this week, which will be in effect on March 26th.
Finally, over in Austria, so I understand authorities there have decided to suspend vaccine mandates for adults. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. So just 4 months ago, Austria was the first EU country that announced a vaccine mandate for nearly all adults and planned to punish those who refused to get inoculated with fines of up to 3,600 euros. But now the Austrian government says the mandate is not necessary given the relatively light symptoms of the Omicron variant that had actually triggered Austria's earlier decision to fight the highly contagious variant. Enforcement of the law was to begin next Tuesday. Now, the country's health minister, however, said the plan would go through another review and can be reintroduced if any new variant emerges. Meanwhile, around 74% of Austria's population have received at least 2 vaccine doses so far.
Right. Hopefully we will not see a new variant in the near future then.
Right.
All right. So thank you for that report.
My pleasure.
Topping our news segment on this Thursday afternoon are the results of the 20th presidential election. Yoon Suk-yeol of the main opposition party is poised to take over the helm of the country come May. Our Kim Bo-kyung reports.
The People Power Party's Yoon Suk-yeol. That is who people chose to be the country's 20th president. On Thursday morning at 6:20 a.m., with all the votes counted, Yoon was declared the winner of the election after getting around 60,394,000 votes, 48.56% of the total. After winning by the finest margin in South Korea's constitutional history, a race even tighter than the 15th presidential election in 1997, where the gap was just 1.53 percentage points, Yoon expressed gratitude at the campaign's headquarters, saying his win is the people's victory while also emphasizing unity.
I have learned a lot, what is needed to be a country's leader and how one should listen to people's voices. The election is all for the people. Now that our competition is over, we need to get together and be one for our people and country.
On stage in front of the party's headquarters, he stressed that people need to be treated fairly regardless of region, status, and political stance, and promised a better future.
I will always have liberal democracy and the spirit of constitution in mind, take care of public welfare, always consider welfare for those in need, and do my best for South Korea to show national dignity, solidarity of responsibility, and freedom in international society.
Through Yoon's win, the Conservative Party brought about a change of regime after 5 years of Democratic Party rule. This brought an end to the trend of one camp seizing power for 10 years, ever since the direct presidential election system was introduced in 1987. Yoon Suk-yeol has become South Korea's 20th president a year after he stepped down from his role as the prosecutor general last March. He became the very first former prosecutor to be elected as president, and the first president without any congressional experience. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, what Yoon Suk-yeol may lack in congressional experience, as our Kim Bo-kyung said, he reportedly makes up for through his pursuit of justice. In this next report, our Lee Kyung-eun walks us through his path from prosecutor to president-elect.
Yoon Suk-yeol was born in Seoul into what he has called a middle-class family. Both his parents were professors. Yoon went on to study at Seoul National University Law School, but he did not find it easy to pass the bar exam but finally passed it after 9 attempts. After beginning his career in Daegu, it was a case in 2013 that put him in the public eye. Yoon led investigations into the National Intelligence Service over his involvement in a public opinion manipulation scandal during the 2012 presidential election. Despite opposition from his superiors, Yoon insisted on investigating going, as far as accusing the Justice Minister of influencing his investigation.
I have to keep going with my investigation, but there continues to be questions. If investigators feel it's not justifiable and unreasonable and excessive, then that's what they feel as external pressure.
Yoon was demoted for his disobedience, but this is when he became known as a headstrong prosecutor who doesn't give in to power. He left his post with an iconic quote, "I'm not loyal to people." Yoon made a dramatic return to Seoul, perhaps thanks to the headstrong nature of his. He was appointed as the head of the special prosecutor team investigating the massive corruption scandal surrounding then-President Park Geun-hye, which led to her impeachment. There was speculation that Yoon's involvement could be seen as political retaliation related to his demotion. However, Yoon denied this, saying using an investigation for retaliation is something a gangster would do, not a prosecutor. Immediately after Moon Jae-in took office, Yoon was appointed as the head of the Seoul Spring Prosecutor's Office. It was an unprecedented appointment, with Yoon taking the role ahead of his superiors. In 2019, Yoon even became the Prosecutor General. But Yoon's unbreakable will brought him the opposite result this time. His investigation of former Justice Minister Cho Guk-s's family prompted a feud with the government and the ruling Democratic Party. Things reached a peak following the appointment of former Justice Minister Choo Mi-ae, who ordered Yoon be temporarily suspended. Eventually, Yoon resigned as Prosecutor General, leaving a few months before the end of his term.
It's hard for me to watch our society's long-established common sense and justice collapse anymore. However, I will continue to do my best to protect liberal democracy and the people, no matter where I am.
Following his resignation, Yoon immediately emerged as a presidential candidate. Yoon topped approval ratings for potential presidential candidates on the back of growing public disappointment with the government over skyrocketing housing prices. 117 days after his resignation, Yoon declared his presidential bid. He stood on the opposite side of the DP and joined the People Power Party. Yoon had no political experience or any roots in the PPP, but he won the primary, defeating the runner-up in the 2017 presidential election, Hong Jun-pyo. In his acceptance speech, Yoon vowed for a change of government.
We must judge this tedious, corrupt and incompetent government. We must replace this disgusting and hypocritical government.
This was Yoon's core message throughout his campaign, as he presented himself as the ultimate anti-DP warrior. And his common sense and fairness was his key weapon in calling for people's support, a reference to his final remarks on the day he resigned as Prosecutor General. There were times when his ratings briefly dipped due to his family scandals and internal problems within the party. But as the race came to its conclusion, he was running neck and neck with Lee Jae-myung of the ruling Democratic Party. And just 6 days before Election Day, Yoon secured the extra push needed to win, following a last-minute campaign merger with An Chol-soo of the People's Party.
For the future of South Korea and the United People's Government, we both make a promise. I support candidate Yoon Suk-yeol.
I support the will of candidate An Chol-soo to create a united people's government and to make it a success together.
Throughout his career, Yoon Suk-yeol has turned crisis into opportunity. And now eyes are on whether he can do the same when leading the country. Young-eun, Arirang News.
Also, in related news, our Kim Sang-min now shares with us the protocol in place to ensure a proper transition from the current administration into the next to be led by Yoon starting May 10th. To take a look.
Marking the 20th presidential election in South Korea, here's a pop quiz about the national event. As we all know, South Koreans voted for their new leader on Wednesday, March 9th. But when will be the president-elect be inaugurated? That is, when will they actually take power? The answer is May 10th. So what is actually going to happen in the 2 months between the election and the new president being sworn in? That's when the Presidential Transition Committee kicks into action. A new president means a new government. For the new president to form a government that they'll run for the next 5 years, they need some time to prepare for office, from conducting agency reviews to staffing a new administration. This whole post-election preparation will be done by the Transition Committee. The current form of Transition Committee has been used since 1992 when President Kim Young-sam was elected, and since then all administrations kicked off with the committee except for just one. So here's my second question. Which administration was that? The one exception is the Moon administration, as President Moon Jae-in had to quickly fill the spot left empty by the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. This also means the new committee will be the first presidential transition committee in 10 years. When forming a committee, a president-elect appoints a group of around 20 politicians and scholars who are deemed suitable for carrying out their policy goals and who share similar political values. In other words, by looking at who is on the committee, we can get a better picture of the new cabinet's policy directions. Once they have fulfilled their duties, the committee will have to release a white paper showing their activities as well as the budget spent. More details on the committee will be announced in the coming weeks. Those who want to take a sneak peek at what the next 5 years hold for the new administration might want to keep their eyes on the committee over the next 2 months. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
돌봄 시간이 조금 대부분 돌봄을 하게 되면 4시 반까지거든요. 학교나 어린이집이나. 그리고 6시까지 돌봐준다 하더라도 대부분 일찍 찾아가기를 원하시는 원장 선생님들이 많기 때문에 그런 부분에 있어서 저희가 조금 편하게 아이들을 7시까지는 봐주셔야지 일을 할 수 있기 때문에 그런 부분이 좀 좋아졌으면.
저도 개인적으로 조그만 사업체를 운영하고 있는데 그 방역으로 인해서 사실은 개인 사업자들이 굉장히 많은 피해를 받고 그 피해가 어떻게 보상될 것이며 또 그 기준에 따라서 지금 사실은 되게 매주마다 바뀌고 있는 이 기준이 우후죽순 생기는 이 정책들이 좀 안정화되지 않을까 그 기대를 하고 있습니다.
자영업자들에 대한 어떤 어려움들 이런 부분들이 조금 더 이렇게 좀 보완도 되고 혜택도 좀 많아지는 그런 부분이 됐으면 좋겠습니다.
선진국들이 하고 있는 것처럼 조금 빨리 방역 규제를 조금 더 풀어서 이제 여행을 원하는 사람들이나 그렇지 않고 뭐 비즈니스 할 수 있는 사람들한테도 좀 더 많은 기회를 주어줄 수 있으면 좋을 것 같다고 생각합니다.
대거 쓸 시간이 부족하다 보니까는 이제 직장 업무에 좀 이렇게 지장을 받을 때가 많습니다. 돌봄 시간을 좀 더 많이 확대해 주셨으면 고맙겠습니다.
저 같은 경우에는 공학대학원에 지금 다니고 있기 때문에 과학기술의 발전에 조금 더 지원이 있었으면 좋겠다고 생각하고 있습니다.
아무래도 다시 저희 국민들이 여행을 많이 다닐 수 있게끔 다른 나라와의 관계도 좀 개선이 됐으면 좋겠고요.
국민 모두가 마음 편하게 그냥 예전에 그 일상으로 돌아갔으면 하는 게 제일 큰 바람이고요. 서민들도 평범하게 다 같이 마음 편하게 살 수 있는 나라를 만들어줬으면 좋겠습니다.
조금 사회가 많이 분열되어 있는 것 같아서 그런 사회 통합을 조금 더 추구할 수 있는 후보에게
제가 뽑지 않았더라도 국민에 의해서 뽑히신 거니까 잘 하실 거라고 믿습니다.
It's that time of the week yet again when we share with you foreign coverage of events here on the Korean Peninsula. As always, Kim Sung-yeon is here in the studio with me. Welcome back, Sung-yeon.
Great to see you, Sunny. So today we have major international news outlets all talking about Wednesday's neck-and-neck presidential election, with ballots counted late into the night and the final call being made just around 4 a.m. on Thursday. So let's dive right in. Reuters said that South Korean opposition candidate Yoon Suk-yeol was elected president, with ruling party candidate Lee Jae-myung conceding defeat as well as congratulating Yoon. It further highlighted that this was an unusually bitter election campaign, but that the policy stakes are particularly high for Korea, with a population of 52 million. It also noted that around 77% of Korea's eligible voters cast their ballots to select the leader of a nation that is rising in its global status, even with gender and generational divisions, on top of a confrontational North Korea. Reuters indicated that now Yoon must handle all challenges, such as Korea's worst wave of COVID-19 infections, skyrocketing housing prices, growing inequality, while dealing with the intense rivalry amongst China and the U.S. Moreover, it said that the new president must seek negotiations to address North Korea's nuclear ambitions as well.
And aside from Reuters, Sung-yeon, I understand another outlet touched upon our tight race.
Yes, the Associated Press was emphasizing that this race was indeed one of the closely fought presidential elections in Korea, as when nearly 99% of the ballots were counted, Yoon Suk-yeol had 48.6% of the votes against rival Lee Jae-myung, who had 47.8%. So AP News mentioned that during the wee hours of Thursday morning, there was a big crowd of supporters near Yoon's Seoul home, as he was expected to make a formal victory speech. The report added that Yoon is to take office starting in May, becoming the leader of the world's 10th largest economy. In the meantime, it pointed out that the former governor of Gyeonggi-do Province, Lee Jae-myung, sincerely asked the president-elect, after conceding his defeat, to open a new era of unity and harmony. Regarding policy, AP pointed out that Yoon said he would deal with North Korea very sternly and try to boost trilateral security efforts with Washington and Tokyo. Yoon also mentioned that he would pursue an improved alliance with the U.S. while taking a more bold stance on China. When Yoon's critics have attacked him over a lack of experience in party politics and foreign policy, Yoon has replied that he would allow more experienced officials to tackle key state affairs that require expertise.
Sung-yeon, the New York Times, I understand, had a whole live update section dedicated to Korea's presidential election.
Right, Sunny, the New York Times kept updating all the key happenings unfolding during the race, finally noting that the opposition's Yoon won that very tight race against Lee for the presidency to bring back the conservatives back to power. So the Times further elaborated that Yoon won the neck-and-neck election, in the end reinstating conservatives to power after 5 years in the political wilderness. And it said this comes with calls for a tougher stance on North Korea and a stronger alliance with the U.S. And New York Times also explained that Yoon, an anti-corruption crusader who had helped imprison former President Park Geun-hye when convicted of corruption, was recruited by the party to drive a conservative revival. The Times stressed that Washington, along with South Korea's neighbors, all closely watched the election because Yoon's win could rattle incumbent President Moon Jae-in's progressive agenda, particularly his trademark policy of seeking peace with North Korea. All in all, the report noted that such a close race was a sign of the divisive and contentious race to choose the next leader. It added that polls in the weeks leading up to the election had also shown that voters were nearly evenly divided between the two frontrunners.
Finally, Sung-yeon, Bloomberg had an in-depth coverage on Yoon's background. Tell us about that.
That's right, Sunny. So Bloomberg went into quite detail about former top prosecutor Yoon Suk-yeol, who will now be succeeding President Moon Jae-in, indeed, who happens to be Yoon's earlier boss, until they had a fallout over investigations into the president's close associates at the time. So Bloomberg explained that the background behind Yoon, saying the former prosecutor is a political newcomer, as well as foreign policy novice. Yoon was handpicked by Moon Jae-in in 2019 with a mandate to make good on the president's wishes to go after the most powerful and reform the prosecution. However, relations between Yoon and President Moon deteriorated after Yoon's investigations included members of the current administration, even leading to the resignations of two of Moon's justice ministers. Regarding future policy, an analyst was cited as saying that with Yoon being a conservative president, the country is now expected to be more clear toward the alliance with the United States. Another expert indicated that Korea is now likely to play a greater role in safeguarding international norms and universal values under Yoon. Hence, Yoon is expected to be a more active participant in sanctions against Russia and North Korea. Regarding the economy, Yoon has promised to narrow the income gap in Korea and introduce a 100-day emergency rescue plan for the COVID-hit nation, according to the report.
All right, Sung-yeon, thank you for that coverage.
The pleasure is mine.
Among the challenges that remain to be tackled by the incoming administration are those related to COVID-19. For more on the tasks ahead, I have Professor David Kwok from Sooncheng University. Welcome back, Professor Kwok.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
I also have Professor Kim Moon-gyu at Yonsei University, live on the line. Professor Kim, it's good to see you again.
Great to be with you, Sunny.
Right, Professor Kwok, we'll start here in the studio. Korea's daily tally has hit well above 300,000 cases for the second straight day. Do you suppose Korea is now witnessing its peak?
Well, I'm dearly hoping so. Korea, the government originally made the speculation that we might see the actual peak in about the second or third week of the March, which we haven't come into yet. So there's still a possibility that we might still further increase or rise in the pandemic wave. I'm dearly hoping that would not be the case, and I'm dearly hoping from this point on we'll only see the decline from the peak. But what happened in the past week and this week is that the numbers of the tests were quite increased due to the resumption of schools, and a lot of the people who were exposed to other friends around being tested, they also had to test themselves, and incidentally, a lot of the cases were found to be positive, just because the virus itself is really transmitting exponentially, and it's just transmitting to everyone. So I personally presume that most everyone who's currently going through any sort of respiratory symptoms is quite likely, it's quite probable that they're having the Omicron virus. So the numbers really don't reflect what's really happening, because only those who are tested will test positive in the PCR testing, and there would be many more people who have not tested and who hasn't come up in the wave and the graph that we're currently drawing. So I'm still dearly hoping the actual numbers who are going through the disease would start to decline from this point and on, but we would have to give it about a week or more to really see it actually happens.
Right. And Professor Kim, what, meanwhile, are your prospects with regard to Korea's COVID-19 situation 2 months from now, that would be in May, when the Yoon Suk-yeol administration enters office?
I think Omicron will remain an issue of the current government. Actually, there are three factors affecting the pandemic: the human factor, virus factor, and the government factor. First, the human factor, the past 2 years of successful quarantine measures was very good, but it showed a very limited level of natural immunity. Second, virus factor, now we are facing Omicron, not the Wuhan strain, which is highly transmission and low severity. So the past quarantine measures are not so effective. And third, the government factor. Most of the quarantine measures were determined by some political initiatives. For the past few weeks, easing social distancing measures despite the surge was embarrassing. Now about 10% of Korean population got COVID, but must be 2 times higher or even more in real situation. That gives me a suggestion that Omicron is going to increase in a few more weeks to come if we maintain current policy, then decline.
Right, I see. And Professor Kwak, during his campaign rally, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol vowed to lift business restrictions on drinking and dining establishments as well as entertainment venues. What are your thoughts on this pledge at this juncture in our fight against Omicron?
Well, I actually agree completely with what Dr. Kim has just mentioned, that it's quite regretful that we are rushed into easing the social distancing guidelines when we are actually we have not come into the peak of the wave yet. And I think it won't be too late if we still remain observant for a little more while and actually take any actions after confirming that we're safe to do so. I think at the current state, when we have 11 p.m. Curfew hours and most everyone's really going about their daily lives as regularly as possible, I don't think it's going to affect that much economically speaking. I'm not an expert in economy in any ways, but I don't think it's going to affect us in any ways if we delay the further easing of the restrictions further on. Particularly because we haven't came any close to the peak of severe rates yet, let alone the death rates, because that's bound to happen 2 weeks after the actual confirmatory cases that happens before. So what we're seeing is when we have not gone into the peak of the actual wave yet, that means that we have not gone into the peak of the death rate and the severity rate that is about a couple of weeks in the future to come. I'm dearly hoping that it'll stay mild, but there is still a great chance that because already we're seeing about 12 to 1,300 cases, 11 to 1,200 cases of ICU capacity that's being filled, that's bound to increase a lot, very steeply in the near future, let alone we're seeing steep rise in the death rates as well. We're seeing daily cases of 150 to 200 every day. Those people are not being admitted in a hospital, those people are actually dying every day. And that's bound to actually increase. So I don't think now is the greatest time to really talk about easing further of the social distancing guidelines. I don't think there's no way of actually going back either. But at this point, we need to stay observant for at least couple to three more weeks and see that and confirm that we do decline in the actual confirmation cases. And also we have the capacity to handle severe cases in our units. Then we can make sure that we are in the safe place to go ahead with the easing of the social distancing.
Right. And keeping in mind the concerns raised by Professor Kwak, Professor Kim, there is indeed still much debate over plans to further ease social restrictions. Critics claim it's premature given the current overwhelming caseloads, while advocates assert that such containment efforts are futile in the presence of Omicron. Either way, do you believe, Professor Kim, that there needs to be a tangible shift in strategy?
I hope that the new government should make decisions scientifically based on evidence and listen to the experts. It's time to be concerned for severe cases. Omicron outbreak is something hard to manage compared to one original strain. If we want to remove quarantine measures, first of all, we have to ask ourselves, are we ready to treat with severe cases in a huge number, and including infants? Building up manpower who can care for severe cases take a long time and a lot of efforts. And if we have these, also we might have to run the facility in a very flexible way in non-pandemic times. So that means we should have a long-term plan also. I hope that the new government understands this situation.
Right. And talking about long-term planning, Professor Kwak, what do you propose with regard to the burden of treatment costs for severely ill COVID-19 patients who face a prolonged fight against their infection?
That's actually a very realistic question that we're already facing in the medical sector. If I may give an example, in my personal acquaintance who is a neuropsychiatric doctor, one of the patients who have been admitted before getting COVID-19 infections were sent off to the COVID-19 treatment center. He or she had to stay there for quite a while, came back with the rather long-term sequelae, remaining side effects from the COVID-19. Currently has come back to the neuropsychiatric department, is being treated for his or her original disease, but has still the remaining effects from COVID-19 as well. So that brings us this question to how much of an extent that patient could be afforded by the government, because COVID-19 originally has said to be really supported by the government. I think there would be a limitation in the length of time and also to the cost for which the government actually can support, because we cannot treat everybody who's had COVID-19 for any remaining sequelae, meaning there would be patients who's had comorbidities, who's had cancer, who's had other types of diseases that coincided with COVID-19, and it sort of intermingles that it cannot be distinguished apart whether the remaining symptoms is actually due to his or her original disease or COVID-19 itself. I think eventually we'll come to a place where it will become to be treated just like any other diseases, where government supports a certain huge portion of the total bill, but the patient actually has to pay a smaller portion for his or her own medical bill. I think that will eventually become the case, but at least for the time being, we still have to focus on doing our best to really treat these critical cases at the point. But eventually, when the new government takes over, that'll be something for them to actually think about.
Right, it will. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, on the testing front, authorities, I understand, are looking to scrap the need for double verification via a PCR test with regard to COVID-19 infection by acknowledging positive rapid antigen test results if they have been conducted by a medical expert. What are your thoughts on this?
Reports show that the sensitivity for rapid antigen test is around 70% or less, but specificity is more than 99%. In other words, negative results cannot say you are free of Omicron, but positive results means you are more than 99% infected with Omicron. Personally, my daughter got Omicron and she was negative with rapid antigen test, but 2 hours later, she was positive in PCR. I think only positive results with rapid antigen test can replace PCR in non-high-risk patients. We have to worry about the false positive rate, but this is around 0.05%, which is very low. So generally, rapid antigen test is not suitable in a hospital setting, but we can use it in the public health centers.
Right, to ease the burden on testing, of course. Yes. Meanwhile, Professor Kwak, the new incoming administration has also spoken about the need to bolster the medical infrastructure to better tackle pandemics such as COVID-19. What are your words of advice with regard to this new initiative?
Well, I'm going to have to make a bunch of statements that are quite personal to myself, and I fear that I might get attacks from many different watchers who disagree with me. But the fact that we're losing a lot of these manpowers in certain areas of medical sector, especially in the pediatrics, especially in the cardiac surgery, the main reason is because they're not compensated righteously. So they lose interest in going into such departments to really take care of those patients who are vitally unstable, who need major treatments. Instead, they decide to go into something easier and milder where they can have their own personal life along with getting deserved compensation, so to say. That's an area where it's strictly controlled by the government in this country. And if they do not correct it, coming up with more manpower is not going to necessarily solve the problem, because more men coming out of the schools will actually decide to go into easier stuff still. If they don't fix this core problem that the people who actually deserve to be compensated more for their hard working, not just the labor, but also their dedication. If it's not fixed, we're keep going to lose medical personnel that decide to really care for people. I think, and I'm hoping that the next government will take this into a deep consideration and really look at this in a righteous and a greater picture, that the main core of the problem really lies within the structure itself rather than something of the numbers. So I want to emphasize that point here today.
Right. And Professor Kim, President-elect Yoon has also highlighted the importance of supporting Korea's broader ventures on the vaccine and treatment fronts. How do you respond?
We don't know about the future. We may encounter future pandemic, but we do not know when, where, how, and what kind of pathogen. Taiwan has an expert committee who can communicate with the president directly. So that is the reason why Taiwanese government was very fast working against this pandemic, even in the middle of December 2019. We need to build up research infra, including basic research for vaccine and drugs. And we need a huge fund for clinical trials. I will give you an example of Chickenpox Vaccine, which was developed in Japan in 1986, and Korea licensed it in 1988, 2 years later. But CDC in USA did not approve it until 1995 to protect domestic companies. Korean government did not wait for CDC results at that time, but for this pandemic, we need to wait for a long time for get those vaccines. So if we need a vaccine, evaluate in an expert committee, produce it, or if not, import it as soon as possible. That should be a policy.
Right. And Professor Kwak, speaking within your capacity as a doctor as well, what do you believe should be the priority of the pandemic tower control, or control tower that is, that the new government plans to set up once in office?
I think I can word it in a simple word, really. It's refining the protocol. In the beginning phases of the pandemic, we were far advanced than many other countries because we were able to come up very quickly with the testing method and also the manufacturing power behind it. It mainly happened because we experienced MERS and SARS before. Even though we did not had written it down in a document as a protocol, but we had brain powers and manpowers who experienced it, knew how to gather up people and quickly react to what was happening at the time. Something like this probably, and hopefully, will not happen for another 100 years or so, but we need to prepare ourselves for the hardest and the most difficult. And that can only be taken care of really efficiently if there is a protocol that we can follow very safely. And I'm hoping that the new control tower, when they come in to place, they will make a very firm protocol that everyone can follow easily word by word. And if that is done so, we can manage any sort of future happening diseases, whether that be for infectious diseases or whether that be something else. So I think making up and coming up, establishing the protocol righteously is the most important.
Right, and talking about fresh efforts, Professor Kim, in what direction should the Yoon administration's COVID-19 strategy seek to flow?
I ask for one thing. I hope that they have open ears, open minds. I hope that they make real efforts to build up an expert committee dealing with ICU beds and long COVID issues. And as I'm a pediatrician, I wish that we can empower the pediatric healthcare system. And since we might encounter another pandemic in the near future, and Korea is close to China, which has many outbreaks, we should have a flexible long-term plan to control future pandemics, increasing the ICU facilities and manpower.
Right. Professor Kim, we have a bit of time left, so I'd like to ask you one other question. Speaking about efforts to deal with pandemics, where do you stand on the debate with regard to second booster shots for adults on the premises that this current pandemic will turn endemic in the near future?
Most of the scholars say that if you got infected, that means you have one shot of vaccine. So if you got infected, you might have 2 vaccines and totally that means you have 3. But after the 3rd shot, I'm not sure when should we have the next one. My personal opinion is about 1 year, but since Omicron is the major pathogen of COVID-19 in Korea, I believe that natural immunity infected with COVID-19 will be much more longer than we previously thought.
Right, and Professor Kwok, there are concerns that rampant infections across society are looking to disrupt essential services and work here in the country. Do you believe further shortening the quarantine period for COVID-19 patients could be one viable option to address potential disruptions?
I absolutely disagree with that idea. It is currently being thought that people who have COVID-19 usually start to dissipate their transmissibility into their 3rd to about 5th day, about 90%. But that still have about 10% possibility the person could be spreading as much of the virus as in the beginning. So shortening the quarantine period is currently not the safest way to handle this. Rather, educating people better, because as we go through these eased restrictions, people are already being advised that there will not be repercussions if they don't follow the social distancing. So they start actually getting ideas that it's much easier, even if they got infected, that they could go around with their daily lives. So if they're not going to really enforce their social distancing, I think it's the safest place that they at least remain during in the period of time that they need to be self-quarantined for, because otherwise, if they start going out, let's say 5th day and on, there is a much greater chance that the people could actually start to spread to others. But if that happens to people who are more vulnerable, let's say, who are confined in admission hospitals, who are solitary hospitals, then it'll become a dire consequences. We don't ever want that to happen. So I think it's safe to say, for the time being, it's still safer for people to be quarantined at least 7 to 10 days, and I'm hoping that'll stay more than 7 days, though.
Right, I see. All right then, Professor Kwok, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, thank you for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. We'll be back with more coverage on Friday. Be sure to join us then. Thank you for now.